He shoved my graduation cake off the table. The noise was sickening. A squelch of frosting and cardboard hitting the hardwood floor. My 10-year-old nephew, Liam, grinned, a cruel, practiced expression, and delivered the final blow. "Eat it off the ground, Aunt Daisy." The whole table laughed. My mother, Linda, 60, retired teacher, laughed the loudest, clutching her stomach. I, Daisy, 27, stood there, the cake knife still in my hand, watching the white chocolate shavings melt into the wood of my mother's expensive patio in Boise, Idaho. This wasn't just a dessert. It was my MBA graduation cake, the symbol of 5 years of sacrifice and the promise of a future I fought for. I didn't utter a word. I simply walked out while their laughter, the sound of my sister's victory, and my mother's apathy followed me into the dark. The humiliation wasn't new. It was merely the climax of years of emotional and financial exploitation. They saw me, the financial analyst, not as a daughter, but as a guaranteed revenue stream. For 3 years, while I was buried in my MBA program, I had been servicing their lifestyle. After my father passed, my mother and sister, Amanda, 35, stay-at-home mom, convinced me to co-sign on 2 massive loans, one for Amanda's luxury SUV and another for a major addition to my mother's house. I was secretly paying $1,040 every month to cover the mortgage shortfall and the SUV payment. I essentially paid for them to live comfortably while they treated me like dirt. When I reached my tiny rental apartment, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother, Linda. It didn't mention the cake or Liam's abuse. It was simple, cold, and final. "We've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever. We're done with your drama." My sister Amanda quickly liked the message. The pain was immense, but the silence of the severance was the clarity I needed. They weren't cutting me off. They were arrogantly cutting off their funding source, confident I'd crawl back and keep paying. I sat down at my laptop, ignoring the lingering scent of cruelty. It was time to open my personal ledger and calculate the true, quantifiable cost of their unconditional cruelty and my absolute financial revenge.
When I reached my tiny rental apartment that night, the anchor wasn't hot. It was cold and analytical. My mother, Linda, and my sister, Amanda, weren't just emotionally cruel. They were financially arrogant. They were so certain of my permanent reliability that they didn't even bother to feign concern after their public attack. The final text from Linda was the ultimate confirmation. "We've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever. We're done with your drama." My sister's like beneath it was the final vicious signature. My heart ached, not from loss, but from the brutal realization that for the past 3 years, my identity in this family had been solely tied to my bank account. They hadn't cut me off. They had fired their financial manager. They believed that by cutting the emotional tie, they could shame me into returning to my role, begging them to let me back into their lives and therefore back onto their bank's demons. I sat down at my laptop, the image of my ruined MBA graduation cake, my $80,000 degree, spurring me into action. I opened a massive spreadsheet labeled Family Ledger. My training as a financial analyst took over. I needed to quantify the depth of their exploitation before I made my final move. The numbers were sickeningly clear. Over the past 3 years, I had secretly been covering Amanda's SUV loan, $640 per month, co-signed by me, used exclusively by her, Linda's house edition, $400 per month, the shortfall on her unaffordable mortgage, Liam's private tuition, $250 per month, my gifts were always tuition payments. The total financial leash was $1,290 every single month. I had paid nearly $47,000 for them to live comfortably in Boise, Idaho, while I lived frugally. The $1,290 was the exact price of their freedom and their cruelty. I didn't reply to my mother's text with an emotional outburst. I typed one cold line back. "Understood. Please arrange to assume sole liability for the co-signed loan and mortgage by 5 p.m. Tuesday. Effective immediately, the payment source has been terminated. I then immediately contacted my bank. The time for being the silent scapegoat was over. My revenge wouldn't be loud or emotional. It would be a financial guillotine. Swift, precise, and entirely non-negotiable.
The text I sent them: understood. Please arrange to assume sole liability for the co-signed loan and mortgage by 5 p.m. Tuesday. Effective immediately, the payment source has been terminated, was the first time I, Daisy, had ever truly stood up to my family. It was cold, professional, and entirely without emotion. The only language Linda and Amanda understood. I immediately contacted my bank's loan department. My status as a financial analyst gave me an edge. I didn't ask if I could stop paying. I demanded to know the exact, immediate legal consequences for my co-signers if I ceased payments. The answer was the second piece of clarity I needed: the SUV loan. Since I was the primary earner, missing the $640 payment would immediately flag the loan as delinquent and cause a massive, irreparable hit to Amanda's credit within 15 days. After 30 days, the bank would begin the repossession process on the vehicle. The mortgage shortfall. Missing the $400 mortgage payment would cause the entire house, the same house where my nephew Liam had smashed my cake, to be flagged for default. Linda would receive the official notice within a week. My family's reliance on me was so absolute that they had no plan B. They never considered I might actually be serious about the severance. They thought they could shame me into returning. I received a series of frantic, panicked text messages, but they weren't apologetic. They were threats disguised as pleas. Amanda, are you serious, Daisy? I need that SUV for Liam's practice. Don't you dare ruin my credit, you spiteful witch. Linda, this is your father's house. You are responsible for keeping it out of default. You will not betray your family over a silly cake. I didn't respond to any of them. The sheer financial terror in their texts was more satisfying than any emotional apology could have been. They had made their choice. They chose public humiliation and familial cruelty over my financial support. Now, I chose to defend my MBA degree and my future career over their comfort. I set up automatic alerts to track their loan status. My revenge was not just to stop paying. It was to use my financial knowledge to execute a strategy that would have the highest possible impact on their lives without technically breaking any law myself. I had already decided I wouldn't just let them face the bank. I would be there to ensure their downfall was public, undeniable, and permanent. The 2-day window I, Daisy, had given Linda and Amanda closed on Tuesday at 5 p.m. I hadn't received a single logical response, only a series of furious, entitled texts and voicemails. They still hadn't grasped the reality. I was no longer their cash cow. I was their creditor turned enforcer. They believed my threats were purely emotional, never financial. I called my bank. The mortgage company confirmed that the $400 payment was already flagged as past due, and the automated system had generated the first official notice of default for my mother's house. The SUV loan payment of $640 was also missed, pushing the total monthly delinquency to $1,040. The bank confirmed they would send the official notice bearing my name as a co-signer directly to both Amanda and Linda within 24 hours. I knew Amanda's most valuable currency was her reputation within her affluent mom circle. She couldn't afford for the neighbors to see her luxury SUV repossessed. My revenge needed to be precise and highly public. I drove across Boise, Idaho, and parked strategically near my mother's large suburban home. I watched as Amanda drove up in the SUV, the very vehicle my money had been funding for 3 years, and parked it proudly in the driveway. Her son, Liam, got out and marched to the door, oblivious to the financial time bomb ticking under their lives. I sent a single, final text to Amanda. The delinquency notice for the SUV arrived today. You have until Friday at noon to pay the full overdue balance of $1,040 or the bank will begin repossession proceedings. This isn't a threat, it's a legal certainty. Amanda's response was immediate, a phone call so hysterical I had to mute the speaker. She wasn't begging for me, she was begging for her social standing. The humiliation of losing her status symbol was clearly worse than the humiliation she inflicted on me with the cake. I didn't answer. I had given them every chance to take responsibility, and they had chosen self-pity and entitlement. My MBA training taught me to identify and eliminate financial risk. My heart taught me that this risk was named Amanda and Linda. The next phase was to ensure the bank's action, the consequence of their choice, was visible for the entire family to see. I, Daisy, sat in my quiet apartment, reviewing the bank's automated emails. The delinquency notices had been successfully generated. Amanda and Linda now had official paperwork confirming their failure to cover the $1,040 combined payment for the SUV and the house, respectively. My heart felt heavy, but clear. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting my future and my MBA degree, which their financial dependency had threatened. I received one final, desperate text from Amanda. "I'll have to take the bus. Liam will be humiliated. Please, Daisy. I'm sorry about the cake. Just stop this." The apology, coerced by financial panic, meant nothing. It proved that Liam's public cruelty was less painful to her than the prospect of losing her status symbol. I knew that repossession was inevitable, but the process takes time. I didn't want the bank to handle it quietly. My revenge needed to be as public and humiliating as the cake incident. I decided to expedite the visible consequences. I called the bank's repossession department and, leveraging my knowledge as a financial analyst, calmly explained the history of delinquency and the urgent need to mitigate the bank's exposure to bad debt. I subtly hinted that the current borrower, Amanda, was financially unstable and that the asset's value was rapidly deteriorating. I requested an immediate asset retrieval. To my satisfaction, the bank, prioritizing quick asset seizure over due process, agreed to dispatch a tow truck the following morning. I drove back to my mother's affluent street in Boise. I noted the time Amanda usually left to drop Liam at school, 8 a.m. I contacted a close old high school friend who still lived nearby and was an avid gossip. I sent her a vague text. "Headed to Linda's street tomorrow morning for a sensitive delivery. You won't believe what's happening." I ensured the perfect audience would be ready for the spectacle. I wanted Amanda to feel the full, crushing weight of her entitlement in the most public way possible, standing on the curb, watching her luxury SUV, the symbol of her superior status, be towed away, all while her neighbors and, critically, Liam watched. This was the final, non-negotiable step to complete the financial severance. The following morning, I, Daisy, was up before dawn, adrenaline masking my exhaustion. I knew the exact schedule of the tow truck driver from the repossession company. My target, 8:05 a.m., the moment Amanda and Liam would be leaving my mother's house in Boise. I drove my unassuming sedan and parked a block away from their street, near the intersection where I had subtly planted the seed of gossip with my old high school friend. At 8:02 a.m., the flatbed tow truck rounded the corner. I gave the driver a discreet nod. He had my instructions, confirmed with the bank's asset retrieval team. Swift, professional, and zero negotiation. At 8:05 a.m., the garage door opened. Amanda, dressed in her expensive athleisure wear, backed the luxury SUV down the driveway. Liam was already inside, waiting for his ride to school. Amanda saw the tow truck, and her face immediately drained of color. She slammed the car into park and leaped out, screaming. The tow truck driver, a massive man with a clipboard, was unfazed. "Ma'am, the vehicle is being repossessed due to the $1,040 delinquency on the co-signed loan. Please step away from the vehicle." Amanda's high-pitched wail turned into a frantic plea. "It's a mistake. My sister, Daisy, makes the payments. She's doing this to hurt me. Wait, I'll call her." I watched from my sedan as she frantically dialed my number, which now went straight to voicemail. Then, Liam got out of the SUV, witnessing the scene unfold. The image of him watching the humiliation, a mirror to the image of me watching him smash my cake, was the final, satisfying symmetry. The worst part for Amanda wasn't the driver, it was the neighbors. My gossipy friend and several other suburban mothers, drawn out by the commotion, stood at the end of their driveways, phones discreetly lifted. Amanda's status symbol, her vehicle of freedom and social standing, was being winched onto the truck bed in front of her entire audience. She was exposed as a financial failure and a deadbeat borrower. As the tow truck pulled away, Amanda collapsed onto the curb, sobbing. I saw Linda rush out of the house, clutching her robe, shouting threats at the empty space where the SUV had been. They had chosen their cruelty over my financial support. Now, the consequences of that choice were public, irreversible, and perfectly timed.
The public, humiliating repossession of Amanda's SUV was the appetizer.
The main course was the impending foreclosure on my mother's house, the very house where my MBA graduation cake was smashed. The bank had sent the notice of default for the mortgage shortfall directly to Linda's affluent address in Boise, Idaho. The overdue amount of $400 had now ballooned with fees and penalties. Linda, the meticulous former teacher, was facing ruin because she was too proud and entitled to cover her own deficit. 2 days after the SUV repossession, Linda finally broke her silence. Her voice was not hysterical, like Amanda's, but shaking with pure, cold fear. "Daisy, you need to fix this immediately. The bank called. They said if the full amount isn't paid within 30 days, we lose the house. This is your father's house. You will not let them do this to me." I, Daisy, finally answered her call, maintaining a calm professional distance. "Mother, I am no longer your financial manager. As I stated, the payment source has been terminated. The default is a direct result of your financial choices." "But I have nowhere to go. You have an MBA. You can't let your own mother be homeless," she pleaded. "I have an MBA, which means I understand assets and liabilities," I countered, delivering the final, crushing truth. "You and Amanda chose to prioritize Liam's social status over my emotional dignity and my financial security. You chose a $640 a month SUV payment over a $400 a month mortgage stability. You chose cruelty. This consequence is not my action. It is a feature of your poor financial planning." I knew that seeing the house in default was enough to break them. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy. I will not pay the $400 debt, but I will stabilize the house on my terms. My proposal was simple, precise, and utterly devastating. I would buy the house from her at its current, depressed market value due to the default status, pay off the bank, and allow her to live there rent-free for 6 months while she figured out her retirement. But the catch was this: Amanda and Liam were forbidden from ever living there again. If they moved in, the rent started, effectively forcing them out. The house would become mine. The scapegoat would become the landlord. The look on Linda's face as she realized she was trading ownership for survival was the most satisfying moment of the entire calculated revenge. The emotional climax had passed. Now came the cold, legal execution. The house, the final symbol of my childhood and my parents' entitlement, was about to become my asset. I, Daisy, met my mother, Linda, at the office of a neutral attorney in Boise. Linda, the former teacher who always lectured me on responsibility, looked years older. She was alone. Amanda was at home hysterically trying to figure out how to transport Liam without the SUV. The shame of having the house in default, coupled with the bank's looming deadline, had stripped Linda of her last shred of arrogance. The attorney laid out the documents, a standard purchase agreement for the house, negotiated at a price slightly above the remaining mortgage, allowing Linda to clear the default and walk away debt-free. Then came my clause, the addendum to the lease agreement. Linda would live in the house rent-free for 6 months, giving her time to find an affordable apartment. Crucially, the addendum contained a clause stating that Amanda and Liam were permanently barred from residing in the property. Any violation would immediately terminate the lease and initiate eviction proceedings against Linda. The house, which had once been the center of their cruel family unit, was now legally split. Linda stared at the clause, her eyes wide with a mixture of grief and fury. "You're separating me from my grandson? You're punishing Liam for a childish prank?" Liam's prank was a symptom of the disrespect you and Amanda cultivated. The $1,040 I paid every month for 3 years was an investment in a family that tried to sever contact with me over cake crumbs. This purchase is my final severance payment. You can have peace and financial stability, but you must choose peace over their entitlement. Linda realized she had no leverage.
Her signature on the purchase agreement was her only exit from foreclosure and ruin. With a trembling hand, she signed the papers, selling me the house and legally agreeing to exile her eldest daughter and grandson. The transaction was complete. I was now the owner of the house where I had suffered years of emotional abuse. I had replaced the memory of the smashed cake with a fully executed legal contract, securing my future while finally forcing my abusers to face the real-world consequences of their financial dependency.
The contract was signed. I, Daisy, was the owner of the house in Boise, the house where my mother, Linda, had once felt so secure in her entitlement. The financial news of the SUV repossession and the impending house sale was too dramatic to stay contained. Within hours, the story, fueled by the neighborhood gossip I had cultivated, exploded through the family network. I received a barrage of frantic calls from cousins, aunts, and uncles, all demanding to know why I had ruined my sister and was making my mother homeless. My response was calm and consistent, using the precise, quantifiable cruelty that justified my actions. I didn't ruin them. I simply stopped paying the $1,040 monthly debt that Amanda and Linda were legally obligated to cover. They chose to cut me off instead of managing their finances. They prioritized a $640 per month SUV over their $400 per month mortgage stability. I protected my future. They failed to protect theirs. The most satisfying fallout came from Amanda. Without the SUV, she had to take the city bus. The image of the entitled stay-at-home mom who only months ago was laughing as her son commanded me to eat cake off the floor, now waiting at a bus stop with her designer handbag, was a public, physical representation of her financial ruin. Amanda attempted to use the family shame against me, posting a tearful message on social media about my cruel betrayal. But I was ready. I replied to the post, not with emotion, but with the raw ledger entries, screenshots showing the $1,040 recurring monthly payments I had been making for 3 years, juxtaposed with the text where Linda told me to stay away forever. The evidence was irrefutable. Amanda's cries of betrayal were immediately drowned out by the family's sudden realization that I was the victim who had been exploited for years. My mother, Linda, received a firm offer on the house from me, which she was legally obligated to accept. She had until the end of the month to move out, and she had to face the difficult truth. She was moving into a small, one-bedroom apartment alone. Amanda and Liam were now fully her problem, without the house or the car. Linda had finally been forced to choose between her daughter's financial dependency and her own survival. She chose survival, confirming that her loyalty was always conditional and based on convenience. The sight of the moving truck pulling up to the house was the final, satisfying conclusion. The house where I had been humiliated was now mine, a symbol of my financial strength and the ultimate price of their arrogance. The sight of the moving truck pulling away from the house in Boise marked the end of my calculated revenge. I, Daisy, stood on the sidewalk, not as the scorned sister or daughter, but as the unconditional owner of the property. The house, the setting of my final humiliation, was now my first investment as a fully independent financial analyst. My mother, Linda, moved into a small, affordable apartment alone. Her calls to me stopped abruptly when she realized the legal finality of the situation. She had chosen to trade her home for her entitlement. Amanda, stripped of her status symbol SUV and now living in a cramped, unglamorous rental, faced the full brunt of raising Liam without her mother's immediate support. Her social status was ruined, her credit was wrecked, and her resentment was useless against the barrier of my legal ownership. The victory wasn't just in the repossession or the house purchase. It was in the quantifiable freedom I achieved. They had believed I was disposable, worth less than the $1,040 monthly payment I provided. By forcing them to confront their financial reality, I proved their arrogance was their most expensive liability. My family's greatest mistake was their assumption that my love was unconditional while their dependence was permanent. They taught me that family love was conditional, and I returned the lesson by making my financial support equally conditional and then permanently withdrawing it. I never told them why I chose to purchase the house instead of simply letting it fall into foreclosure. I bought it because I refused to let that memory, the image of my MBA graduation cake smeared on the floor, be the final chapter. Now, when I look at the house, I see the $47,000 I paid them over 3 years, not the cake. I see the value of my $80,000 degree and the $1040 monthly income I now fully control. My revenge was silent, strategic, and entirely nonviolent. It was the absolute, perfect justice delivered by an accountant who finally settled the ledger. I closed that door forever, walking away not with bitterness, but with a clear conscience and a profitable new asset, carrying the memory of their cruelty only as fuel for my future success.